this sort of government regulation of the content of newspapers and blogs and newsletters. It's this is utterly unwarranted. And where's the need for it? What is it about the media, other than the fact that the News Limited newspapers have been very critical of the government? What is it about the media that is so worthy of additional regulation? I mean, we've got more diversity now, John, than we've ever had. If you go back a decade, if you wanted to get your views out there, you had to, suck up to a producer and get on a program like yours, or a newspaper editor or something like that. Nowadays, there is a plethora, a multiplicity of platforms and sources, and with social media, there has never been so much diversity of media and news and information.
Doesn't the front page of the Daily Telegraph itself create the case for some form of control or regulation? To call Senator Conroy the equivalent of some of the worst dictators and despots and people who have been responsible for murdering millions of people, to put that on a par with media regulation is surely exactly the case for doing
John,
something.
I'm shocked by your remark there, and it's a really, really chilling comment that you've made, because what you're saying is, because the Daily Telegraph has got a mock-up of representing Stephen Conroy as a sort of latter-day Stalin, which is a classical sort of ridiculous, over-the-top caricature in a tabloid, this is the stuff of tabloids, that's what they do, but so you're saying that is an argument for there being media regulation. So what, have the front pages of tabloids got to be dull? Is that going to be the argument? Now listen, if Conroy feels...
No, the argument is that this is done in the name of self-interest, is the point. This is using the powers of the newspaper to protect its patch.
Well, look, everyone peddles their own interest. As Keating used to say, in the great race of life, always back self-interest. But just because it's trying. But just getting back to the question about Conroy depicted in a shapka looking like Stalin, or portrayed as Stalin. Of course, that is a ridiculous caricature. He's clearly not in that league. But if he feels he's been defamed, he should sue them. I mean, the law has got a perfectly... If he thinks that people will seriously hold him in less esteem, and his character has been, belittled and undermined and trashed and so forth by that, then he should take legal proceedings, and he should see what a jury has to say about it.
Okay, let's go through some of the substance of this. The public interest media advocate to oversee print and online media industry's self-regulatory standards. The Press Council, regarded as a toothless tiger in many circles, he's trying to put some teeth into its toothless mouth.
Well, the Press Council is a voluntary organised entity set up by the newspapers, basically, to provide an alternative mechanism for dealing with people's complaints and about breaches of standards. There's no need for the government to get involved in that. There's no need for the government to appoint some regulator. Really, Are you satisfied with the work of the Press Council? Do you think it does a good job? Well, I think it does a reasonable job. I'm not, I don't.
Well, reasonable's not good enough, is it?
Well, but look, it isn't the government's job to regulate newspapers. If the Daily Telegraph or the Melbourne Herald Sun are, doing a bad job, then that's their problem. That's an issue between them and their readers. It is not an issue for the government. If they defame people, you can sue. If they commit a contempt of court, a judge will, admonish them and, haul them up before the bench and so forth. But really, it's, this sort of nanny state compulsive regulation that this government has got. I mean, really, there are, if the Daily Telegraph is writing rubbish, if that's the proposition, people will stop reading it and they'll read something else. And something, They are. I mean, the truth is that, as you know, that people are getting their news from so many different sources nowadays.
Well, and this is not a coincidence. This is coming at a time of the virtual collapse of the business models of freeware television and also the newspapers.
And there's nothing like a bit of government regulation to boost the business model. That's just what they need. Look, what they need is some more advertising. They don't need more regulation and more cost, I can tell you.
All right, a public interest test for nationally significant media mergers and takeovers.
Yeah,
yes
well,
or no?
That's a really bad idea, and it's a bad idea for a couple of reasons. What is the public interest? Conroy couldn't even tell us what the criteria for public interest was. Apparently he's going to reveal that on Thursday, so he'll give the Parliament 4 sitting days to consider it, which is just an insult. That's treating the Parliament and the people we represent, the Australian people, with complete contempt. But
it does make you wonder how serious the commitment to all of this really is.
Well, it does. This is a guy, John, who can't. He doesn't seem to be able to finish anything. He can't close. He announced a deal on anti-siphoning 2.5 years ago and still hasn't got any legislation into the Parliament to give it some statutory force. And you've got to look. Let me just say this to you about the public interest test is just going to become a political interest test. Now, we have got laws on mergers. We've got the ACCC. They have stepped in to stop media mergers where it diminishes competition. We don't need any more legislation in that area.
Okay, very quickly, a 50% rebate on licence fees in exchange for 1,500 hours of Australian content for commercial TV.
Yeah, I think that I think that's been well debated. That's one part of this package that is particularly well understood, and I think it's reasonable. That? Yes, we do. Yeah, we don't have any problems.
Okay, and to remove the 75% audience reach rule on takeovers. In other words, you're not allowed to have the whole of the country in your palm.
This is for television. Yeah. Look,
yes,
there's a very. I know this has become now a bone of contention between the networks. They used to be united on that, and they're now arguing about it. I think there's a lot of tactics here. For my own part, this has got to go to a committee, and we'll make a decision on it depending on how the committee consideration goes. But I think the arguments in favour of the 75% reach rule in the internet era are pretty weak, to be honest. Right. And I think it's, in fact, even the people that are saying it should be maintained are not saying it should be maintained forever. They're sort of saying it. We don't think this is quite the right time.
All right, and finally, you and Senator Conroy have crossed swords recently over the ABC's coverage of the NBN, the broadband.
Well, I haven't crossed swords. He's accused me of all sorts of things, but I haven't crossed swords.
Well, you've made a complaint about an ABC editor's coverage of Senator Conroy's plan, and the ABC upheld your complaint, and Senator Conroy says that's wrong.
Well, look, the ABC. You saw what Jonathan Holmes said on Media Watch, and he basically said that Nick Ross had become an advocate. And had become in fact, he obviously clearly is an advocate for a particular policy as opposed to being an analyst, and I think that's a fair comment. But Ross is a unusual fellow in some respects. I mean, you saw his performance at that press conference in Queensland, where I think he interrupted me 16 times and was pretty rude. He sort of shocked everyone there. And then, of course, he came on your show, was it last week, and said I'd accused him of being corrupt. I've never accused him of being corrupt, as indeed Jonathan Holmes acknowledged. So he's pretty wild in what he says, and probably, I think if you're writing a blog for the ABC, you've got to. I think it's important to be balanced and measured. That doesn't mean you can't have opinions, but I think a bit of balance is important.
Well, that question of opinions is actually at the very core of it. Can ABC people, ABC presenters, ABC editors, ABC columnists have opinions at all?
I think it's a question of how they're expressed and whether they are fairly acknowledging the position of the other side. I'd say one thing, and this will annoy some of the people in the tech journalism world, but I'll just make this comment. You and I are of an age when journalists doing their work used to pick up the telephone and actually call people and talk to them. Of course, you do that for a living. You have to in radio. Quite a lot of these tech journos, so-called, live in a sort of a self-referencing bubble where all of their research, quote-unquote, is basically just looking at stuff online, and they're very reluctant to actually speak to anybody. And one of my criticisms of the ABC's coverage of the NBN has been that they have not gone to the effort, and I cannot understand why they haven't, of actually interviewing